talking about borrowing further, I really want us to use a scriptural example for how to borrow if you do want to borrow. And there are principles for borrowing which actually are from the Bible. Don't forget though, our key scripture that says that the borrower is subject to the lender, and so therefore ideally we shouldn't even be trying to borrow. But let's just say for whatever reason you do need to borrow. I talked about mortgages, for example, for buying property. A property is actually an asset, and so there may be reasons and occasions when you need to borrow, or when it's advisable to borrow to help you get a foot up. But like I say, with the caveats of discipline and understanding, remember, in all thy getting, get understanding, Proverbs 4, chapter 7. And so what are the principles to follow? We can see some principles and we can learn some principles from the book of 2 Kings, chapter 4, verse 1 to 7. It says, a certain woman of the wives of the sons of the prophets cried out to Elisha, saying, Elisha being the prophet, your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that your servant feared the Lord, and the creditor is coming to take my 2 sons to be his slaves. Verse 2, so Elisha said to her, what shall I do for you? Tell me, what do you have in the house? And she said, your maidservant has nothing in the house but a jar of oil. Verse 3, then he said, go borrow vessels from everywhere, from all your neighbors, empty vessels. Do not gather a few. And when you have come in, you shall shut the door behind you and your sons, and then pour into all the vessels and set aside the full ones. Verse 5, so she went from him and shut the door behind her and her sons, who brought the vessels to her, and she poured it out. That is the oil. Verse 6 says, now it came to pass when the vessels were full that she said to her son, bring me another vessel. And he said to her, there is not another vessel. So the oil ceased. Verse 7, then she came and told the man of God, and he said, go sell the oil and pay your debt, and you and your sons live on the rest. Now, there are so many lessons to learn from here. Lesson 0, because actually it's not number 1, but lesson 0 is that borrowing, particularly more than you need, can actually cause you to lose more than you ever bargained for. This is just an interlude to where I'm really going. But we see that the lady says to Elisha, who is the prophet, that my husband borrowed, and now they're coming to take my children. I am wondering to myself, what kind of borrowing did this guy borrow? I mean, if he borrowed a jacket, I don't think they'll be trying to take his children. Or maybe he borrowed, I don't know, an axe or something, or, because this is the old times. Okay, let's even put it in monetary value. Even if you borrowed like 5 grand, I don't think that's enough for them to come and take your children, right? Maybe take your house, maybe take your car, but not your children. So first of all, in my opinion, I'm thinking that this guy must have really, really borrowed a lot of money, or a lot of assets, or whatever it was that he borrowed. But whatever he borrowed was clearly way beyond his capacity. Number 1, because he couldn't pay. And number 2, because when they came to take the payment after the guy died, they're looking for his children. They're not looking for his assets. They're not looking for any of the things he had. Maybe he didn't even have assets. That's why they couldn't take anything else apart from his children. But I just want to sound a red alarm. Anyone who is out there who is borrowing like crazy, apart from the fact that the Bible has told us not to borrow like crazy. Number 2, if you borrow like crazy, you might just end up losing more than you could have ever imagined. That will not be our portion in Jesus' name, but it is a red flag. It is a red warning. Now, as we proceed to where I'm really going, the first point, like I said, that was point 0, if you want to call it that. But the first point I want to bring out is that when you are going to borrow, remember we're talking about principles for borrowing if you must borrow, is that number 1, you borrow containers, you do not borrow oil. And the other way of saying this is that you borrow assets, not liabilities. When you borrow containers, according to verse 3, he said to her, go and borrow vessels from everywhere, from your neighbors. He didn't say go and borrow oil. When you borrow vessels, what you are doing, or containers, is that you are increasing your capacity. So it is possible, for example, in a typical sense that many people do, myself included, thank God I have paid it off now, but student loans, right? Some people borrow to be able to go to university or to be able to do a professional course. Now, that kind of borrowing, although in an ideal world, our parents would have given us money to pay for our student loans, or we would have just had money, or whatever it is. In an ideal world, we would have been able to pay for it. But in that scenario, it is not necessarily an explicitly bad thing. Why? Because your borrowing is so that you can increase your capacity. I use myself as an example. Going to university, doing accounting courses has meant that I'm educated. It meant that I could get a job, which means that income can come in. It meant that I could get professionally qualified. I could open up my business. So being able to do those things was funded by my student loans. But thankfully, the investment has paid off. We have paid off the student loan. The business is open, and we are, we're in for business, and we're in profit, right? So you borrow to increase your capacity. That's just one example. Yeah. And then moving on, if you're going to borrow, point 2 is that you borrow assets. You do not borrow not liabilities, and not just liabilities, but you don't borrow consumables. The oil represents a consumable. We use oil to cook, right? To clean, to whatever. It goes down, it diminishes. But you borrow an asset. The capacity, the container, the vessel represented actually an asset that could be used, because you know what? Also, the asset retains its value. And if need be, the asset could be sold. Remember, looking at previous definitions, the container can be washed and returned back to the person. But if you borrow oil and you use the oil, you can never return that oil. It's gone forever. But the vessel you can use, you can wash, you can clean and give back, or you can even sell it if need be. So you borrow assets, you don't borrow consumables, you don't borrow for liabilities. I am shocked when I hear people saying they're using their credit card to buy food. You're eating food on credit. If they ask you to vomit the food, would you be able to vomit the food in a way that could give you the money back? Never. As they say, once an egg is broken, you can't gather it together again. Even things like clothes, and I know some people will say, oh, you can buy designer clothes and whatever that will increase in value. Yeah, no problem. But if you're having to borrow to do that, the people who actually buy designer clothes for increase in value, trust me, they're not borrowing to pay for it. But, clothes, food, consumables, even petrol is one thing to borrow to buy a car, which I guess you could sell if you needed to, but you're borrowing just to get from point A to B. I don't know how solid your financial foundation is. It's a red flag. It's not something that is advisable. It's not something you should do. But if you're borrowing an asset, like I said, then okay, there may be reasons why you want to do that, or borrowing for an asset, I should say, for example, like a mortgage. There may be reasons why you want to do that, or you're borrowing to get a car, which you're then going to use to increase your capacity to bring money in. Okay. I've even seen or heard people buying or toys for their children on credit, toys that your child will take and fling on the other side of the room and is broken. You can never gather it together. It's not advisable. It is literally a downward spiral if this is something that you're doing. And I would really encourage you to break free from the shackles of borrowing for consumables. Remember, we're talking about principles for borrowing if you must borrow. The third point about borrowing is shutting the door, which we see in verse 4. He says, and Elisha said to her, and when you have come in, you shall shut the door behind you and your sons, and then pour into these vessels and set aside the full ones. Verse 5, so she went from him and shut the door behind her, her sons, who brought the vessels to her, and she poured it out. Now, one key point, when it comes to borrowing, it is not everywhere and everyone you must borrow from. Shutting the door reflects and represents privacy. It also represents boundaries. It's drawing a separation, a demarcation between what she was doing with her sons in the room and any other thing outside of the room or outside of the house. Many people, out of desperation, go everywhere and anywhere seeking for money and seek the money from the wrong places. Now, I don't want to go too deep. I don't want to scare anybody. I know this is not a deliverance channel, but you will be surprised that there are institutions that once you borrow from them, you will never be able to pay back. They have covenants, they have altars that just keep you going in that circle, in that spiral. You just keep on going and going and going, borrowing. Even when you try to pay back, for whatever reason, you can't pay back, or you pay back and then you find yourself having to come back to them. There are altars that power businesses. There are altars that power financial institutions. And so you should be led in the places that you borrow. You should be careful about who you also borrow from. There are also people who make covenants. As they're borrowing you the money, they've done some kind of crazy thing on that money, and you actually find that your life begins to go down. Money is spiritual. I know many people might say she's gone crazy, she's talking too deep, but I promise you, money is spiritual, and altars power transactions. I want to emphasize, he told her to shut the door. Yes, go borrow vessels from everywhere. But now that we are doing business, now that we are looking to multiply, I don't want you doing it in front of everybody and anybody. I don't want anybody to see how we're going to do this multiplication. And so there should be barriers when it comes to business. I can talk about myself personally, where once or twice I've wanted to engage in a transaction and the Spirit of the Lord has said to me, no, you don't mix your money with this person, or you don't mix your money with these group of people. Why? Because my covenant is different from theirs. I know what I do with my money. I know how I do my tithes and my offering and my givings and all of that. I don't know what they do. I don't know who they are celebrating or who they are perpetrating, or maybe they are not covenant people. And so God has said to me, no. And he's restricted me from making financial exchanges with such people. Now, somebody might say, oh yeah, but what about giving to the less privileged? What about charity? What about things like that? Charity is different from transaction of business, where there is an exchange. With charity, I am giving, I'm donating. I don't need you to give me anything back. There's no contract. I'm not signing anything. I'm giving it, and that's the end of it. And even then, by the way, you should still be led even in your charitable donations. Heaven forbid you give to somebody that then uses your money or your things for something negative. Again, I digress. As you know, I can go on to all kinds of different tangents when it comes to finances. But I just want to emphasize that you must set boundaries when it comes to borrowing, when it comes to your finances. There are people that you should not do business with. There are people you should not borrow from, because of the spiritual implications. So be led in all that you do. The fourth point when it comes to borrowing is that there should be no waste. We see in verse 5 of the scripture that we read, 2 Kings chapter 4, it says, now it came to pass when the vessels were full that she said to her son, bring me another vessel. And he said to her, there is not another vessel. So the oil ceased. There is no record of the fact that the oil just kept on coming and coming and coming and coming, and then it spilled on the ground, and then it was just overflowing, and then they had to pack it. No, God does not do waste. And we see that even in the New Testament with Jesus. Remember, when he fed the 5,000, the Bible talks about in John chapter 6, verse 12, it says that when they were finished, he said to his disciples, gather up the fragments. God is not in the business of wasting. I've seen and heard people, you just got a loan from the bank to maybe do something tangible, hopefully buy an asset. And you see people just spending the money on anything, on food, toys, clothes, shoes, jackets, whatever it is. Borrowing is not for consumables. Remember, I said this before. When the need for the asset or the investment that you were trying to make has finished, return the remaining money back to wherever you took it from. Because remember, you're going to pay interest on this money. So if the thing you have invested is not going to give you a return, what is the point of spending it? You're basically buying trainers and toys and shoes and consumables for a much higher rate. So look at it this way. You've taken a loan, and I know no one would do this, but just to give you the example, you've taken a loan and the loan has an interest rate of 10%, for example, over 10 years. And then you go and take £100 of that loan and you go and buy, I don't know, a wig. And the wig is £100. Your £100 wig is actually not £100, because remember, the place you took the money from has 10% interest. So your £100 wig is actually £110. If that is not the going market rate, why are you spending £110 on a wig? Because you borrowed money to pay for it. So you should be using your money for assets, like I said, but making sure that there is no waste by spending it on the wrong things. When the need has finished, like I said, return the capital, return the money to from wherever you have borrowed it from, or taken it from. And last but not least, as I round up this video, number 5, is that you do not live on what you have borrowed, but you live on what you gain and what you retain. I will say that again for anyone who didn't hear. You don't live on what you have borrowed, but you live on what you gain and what you retain. Remember in verse 7, it says that she came back and she told the man of God, and he said to her, go and sell the oil and pay your debt, and you and your sons live on the rest. He didn't tell her to go and sell the containers that she borrowed. He did not tell her to live on the containers. He said, go and sell the oil. It is the multiplication that you live on. You don't live on borrowed vessels. You don't live on anything that you borrow. So that is, you don't use consumables. You don't use your loan for consumables. You use it to increase your capacity. You use it to gain assets. And when the interest starts coming through, then we can talk about buying handbags and shoes and all those lovely things that we love to spend our money on. So that is the summary on borrowing from business, faith, and finance with Benedicta. I hope you have enjoyed it, and I will see you next time.